Welcome to the Fantasy Focus Football Podcast. Nate Ravitz and Matthew Berry here in the studio in Bristol, Connecticut. Coming up on today's show, Matthew, talk a lot about your rankings for Week 8.
Yep.
And there's actually a lot of news also, like injury-related news. So a lot of players that maybe are ranked higher than they might otherwise be just because of situations. So
Rewind. Fantasy news
from the National Football League.
This is the instant replay.
Not sure, Matthew. You might.
Matthew, Greg Jennings got a second opinion on his troublesome groin. He's going to miss, they haven't officially announced it, but he's going to miss this week's game, his fourth straight game, and no timetable on his return. There's not much analysis to be given here other than more bad news for Greg Jennings owner. Although I guess, Randall Cobb's not 100% owned.
Which is shocking to me. And we've said this before. I feel like Cobb was a sleeper for me in the preseason. I've been talking up throughout the season. And he's going to still be productive even when Greg Jennings comes back.
Yeah. My guess is he's not 100% owned largely because of the great number of buys the last couple of weeks.
Right.
That's sort of what has, forced some people to hold off. And if they weren't going to, and also we didn't know how serious Jennings' injury was. So if you think back 2 weeks ago to the Houston game, if you weren't going to start Cobb that week, there wasn't necessarily a huge reason to pick him up.
I don't know. I brought up the fact coming into that Houston game. He was a love for me, and I remember bringing up that fact. And by the way, it's a fact that is still correct.
Understand that. But if you weren't going to start him there, would you have dropped, say, Brian Hartline for him at that point? Think back 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah, hard to say. I think I might have. I like both guys quite a bit. I think it would probably depend on my team.
So I think
fair enough. I understand your point.
But meanwhile, so we'll talk a little bit about rankings here. You have Randall Cobb at 17. Actually, everybody is between 17 and 22, which is I'm sure the highest he's been ranked so far this year. So you love yourself some Randall Cobb this week. You have James Jones at 23.
All right. So since Cedric Benson went down in the Indianapolis Colts game, since that point, Randall Cobb has led the Packers in total offensive yards from scrimmage.
Mm-hmm.
He has 274 yards from that point. Jordy Nelson has 243. Aaron Rodgers loves Randall Cobb. He's looking for him, and they're finding different ways to use him, especially in the middle of the field. So, I think he's a very safe, actually, top 20 play this week.
Yeah, and the thing about James Jones, who's he had the 6 touchdowns in the 3 games. He's not making big plays right now. He's only averaging 11 yards a catch. Matthew, he's a guy that they tend to look for down the field, but they haven't made those plays so far this year. Averaged almost 17 yards a catch last year and about 14 for his career, just 11 this year. So both guys decent starts, but clearly Randall Cobb is the better one.
9 touches last week, 7 the week before against Houston. So it's not just like he's getting one or two big plays.
But I almost feel like that's misleading in a way that's like you're saying, like touches as though they're using him out of the backfield. They're all receptions.
Right.
15 receptions and 1 carry.
All right.
It's not like he's carrying the ball. But that's actually better because that means he's really looking for him as a wide receiver.
Correct.
Like I said, 15.
And there's the option to use him out of the backfield, which, by the way, they have said they're going to try to do more and more of that.
Yeah.
So, whatever. But, if he gets 2 or 3 carries a game, great.
Highly unlikely that would happen. So that's what I think. I don't think you need that though. Evaluate him as a wide receiver.
He's a very good wide receiver.
He's got 60 rushing yards this year. Big deal. That's not a whole lot different than.
That's a touchdown.
But it's not a whole lot different than a lot of other receivers that we wouldn't be spending time talking about their running. It's not unusual for a starting wide receiver to have 3 carries at this point in the year. It's just not.
Right.
So anyway, let's move on. DeMarco.
The point is, we both like Randall Cobb. I like him even more than you. That's right. It's a contest.
You don't actually like him more than me. I agree with your ranking just fine. You know what? I'd rank him 16.
No, you wouldn't. I'd rank him 15.5.
DeMarco Murray not expected to play against the Giants this week, Matthew. Felix Jones, who's also battling an injury, looks like he will play. You ranked him 25th this week. Certainly a step down from last week since he reminded us of his Felix Jones-ness last week.
Correct. And it's not as good a matchup here against the Giants, who have played a lot better recently, in my opinion. So the fact that Tanner got as much work as he did last week, and some of that is due to the fact that Jones left the game with an injury, but that's still a very real possibility this week.
Right.
I think Wednesday, I should say, Philip Tanner took the first team reps. Both guys, to your point, missed practice. And even though Jones is, quote, expected to play, doesn't mean he gets a full load.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, I ranked Tanner probably a little bit higher than I normally would, and I ranked Felix Jones a little bit lower than I normally would because I think you'll see Tanner some.
You're in bad shape if you're starting either of these guys, let's be honest. Quick, Matthew. Eli Manning, outside your top 10. Everyone else had him at 8 or above. You hate Eli Manning.
I do. He is on the hate list this week.
I mean, he did have a bad game against the Cowboys in week 1. Is that a large factor for you?
That's one of the things. I mean,
Okay.
he's also, frankly, he's had bad games the last couple of weeks, too. 13 points against the Redskins, 11 points against San Francisco, 12 points against Dallas. The Cowboys do have a very good pass defense. They're third in the NFL against the pass. And honestly, I think Dallas is going to be able to run. I think the Giants are going to be able to run very effectively in this game with no Sean Lee in the middle of the field for the Cowboys. That's a big loss for the Cowboys. This is a stat that comes up in my love-hate because I have Bradshaw on the love list. And shout out to John Parolin of ESPN Stats Information who found this. But when Sean Lee is in there, the Dallas Cowboys, in terms of what they give up rushing yards, they're basically the Chicago Bears in terms of run defense. Without him, they give up over 5 yards a carry. They're among the worst in the NFL. I mean, that's how important Sean Lee is to their run defense. So I think New York on the road, and given the strength of that secondary, I think New York's just going to run a lot and be very successful at it. So I don't see. I mean, I have him at 11. I'm out to my top 10.
Yeah. You've got him below Andrew Luck, Ben
Right.
Roethlisberger, Michael Vick. So certainly there could be a lot of teams that have those choices.
So yes, but that is why I do. I think he'll be fine. I just don't think he has a huge game here.
Willis McGahee, Matthew. Everybody has a top 10 play. You had him 5th, so did Tristan. But you have him in must-start territory here. Why is that?
I mean, why wouldn't you? Against the Saints, 31st.
I mean, this is an unusually high ranking for Willis McGahee.
It is.
With all due respect to McGahee.
Oh, fair enough. But coming off the bye at home, I always like that. I always like the team off of a bye, primetime game at home. And the Saints are just so bad against opposing running backs. I mean, the Saints have the 31st ranked run defense, okay? And they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs. And in fact, they've given up a touchdown to an opposing running back in every single game, at least one, in every single game this year except one, that was the Green Bay game. So if you're pretty much saying, you know what, chances are the Saints are giving up a touchdown to an opposing running back. They've done it in 6 of 7 games this year.
Right.
I'm sorry, 5 of 6 games this year. And in fact, they've given up, 5, 6, 7, they've given up 8. They've given up 8 touchdowns to an opposing running back in just 6 games this year. So if you're figuring, hey, a running back is scoring for the Broncos against the Saints in this game, I think it's a pretty good chance that it's Willis McGahee.
One more thing, Matthew. This came from an emailer, from Evan. He writes in, Matthew, your ranking of the Kansas City Chiefs defense 9th. The other 3 analysts have them ranked 20th, 21st, 24th. What am I and the others missing regarding the Chiefs defense this week? I'm assuming you have them on your love list. Yep. And this emailer has Houston on a bye and needs to pick up a defense. He's looking at possibly the Jets or the Chiefs.
Well, aside from Arrowhead, I'm invoking Arrowhead.
Sure.
It's partially the Raiders and Carson Palmer. I mean, Carson Palmer has been a turnover machine. I don't believe Darren McFadden has done particularly anything, and the Chiefs' defense has played better recently. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of partially it, right?
Well, they're available in 95% of leagues. They had 5 points last week or the week before the bye, 13 before that against Baltimore. They've been in positive numbers for 4 straight weeks after negatives the first 2.
Well, you remember the first 2 weeks, they were so banged up,
Yep.
and Holly was suspended for the first game, so they've finally gotten healthy and gotten everyone back. And then you look at what the Raiders do to opposing defenses. Last week, the Jaguars had 7 fantasy points against them. The Falcons had 10. The Broncos 9.
Yep.
I mean, they're among the league leaders in terms of most fantasy points allowed to opposing defenses.
They're kind of middle of the pack, but...
Well, they're in the upper half. How about that? They're in the upper half of the league. They give up on average, and certainly recently, last 3 weeks they've given up 7, 10, and 9 points. The last 3 games, the Raiders have given up 7, 10, and 9 points to opposing defenses. So on the road, at Arrowhead, Carson Palmer, the human turnover. Yeah, I like the Kansas City Chiefs as a top 10 play this week.
Welcome to the Fantasy Focus Football Podcast. Nate Ravitz, Matthew Berry, Stefani Bell here, ready to do the Friday previews for Week 8. We will also recap last night's game with plenty of fantasy fireworks.
Yes.
previewing all the games from across the league.
The Friday Previews. No GNews is good GNews with Steffi Bad News.
Speaking of Steffi Bad News, you mentioned this as well. I mean, it's something depressing. So, like, I had Harvin going, obviously, in a ton of leagues last night, and I'm all excited. And then I realized, I'm playing against Martin in a couple leagues, and that just depresses
deflates you.
As always, all the rankings I'm going to refer to in the Friday previews are going into the Thursday night game. They'll be adjusted today to remove those players, and with any other, obviously, injury or otherwise updates. Carolina and Chicago. Matthew, you love yourself the Matt Forte this week. It's number 3 in your rankings. Probably a must start for everyone, but especially love him this week.
Yeah. Well, going against Carolina, just the volume of work that he got last week. He seems to be obviously 100% healthy. Panthers 19th in the NFL against the run. I just think the volume of work and the matchup that he's going to get make him a must play. Just kind of a no-brainer here.
Yeah. Speaking of Cam Newton, ranked as your number 10 quarterback for the week, Matthew, behind, among others, Andrew Luck and Michael Vick. It was actually interesting. You know, everybody has him low this week. You and Chris Harris were the highest at 10. Eric went all the way the other way, 17th.
Wow.
Like, just all out on Cam Newton. Trist has him 14th.
He hates Cam Newton.
None of you guys has him as I feel good about starting him.
How could you?
I mean, he's probably on his way to another suspect game here. And then he's got Washington next week. Do you imagine that, if we could fast forward a couple weeks to the byes are over, do you imagine he's going to be a consistent top 10 ranked quarterback? Rodgers, Breeze, Manning, Griffin, Brady, Ryan.
I think just inside the top 10
Eli,
because of the rushing.
I just named 7 quarterbacks that I have to imagine are going to be ahead of him most weeks. And then when you start factoring in, like, does Tony Romo have a good matchup? Does Josh Freeman have a good matchup? Does Matthew Stafford recover a little bit?
Right.
I don't know. I think he's going to have a hard time squeaking anywhere inside the top 8 or 9.
I think he's borderline, but yes, I do.
All right. Anything else in this game? General question.
I do think because of what the attention that Steve Smith will get, I do think Greg Olsen is a decent start here. Okay. I like Greg Olsen.
I was just going to mention, people saw Jay Cutler take the hit to the ribs last week, but he played through it, so I don't think there's any real concern that he will play this week.
Pigskin Pick'em, Panthers at Bears. I will take the Bears. Stefania.
Bears.
Matthew.
The Bears.
Jay.
It's a sweep.
You have the Chargers defense as your 6th-ranked defense, Matthew. They're only owned in 20% of leagues.
All right, with a banged-up Trent Richardson making Cleveland even more one-dimensional, and Brandon Weeden has not been shy about turning the ball over. They've had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. I think the Chargers could have a pretty nice game here. And you look, they've actually been a pretty decent fantasy defense. They've been amazing, but they've actually been solid.
Have you ever asked Brandon Weeden about his turnovers? He's actually sort of sheepish about it.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know Brandon.
It's not something he likes to talk about.
Yeah. Retiring, bashful.
Pigskin Pick'em, Chargers at
29 points the last 3 weeks for the Chargers, and that includes the 1-point game against the Saints.
Pigskin Pick'em, Chargers at Browns. Take Chargers. Stefania.
Chargers.
Matthew.
The Bolts.
Jay.
Sweep it.
Seattle Seahawks, Detroit Lions. Matthew Stafford. Talk about hate, Matthew.
Oy.
15th in your quarterback rankings. I don't disagree.
Yeah, how could you not? He's been bad, unfortunately. Seattle.
On my team.
Seattle is so good. They allow the second fewest points per red zone trip.
Yeah.
In the NFL. So you get in close, you see what happened to Detroit last week, and I think Seattle will do the same thing that Chicago did last week, which is I think again they'll drop a lot of guys back. They're able to get pressure with 4 guys. They actually have the 3rd most sacks in the NFL when sending 4 or fewer rushers. So they only need to send 4 to get that kind of pressure that they need, and their corners can actually keep up with Calvin Johnson. They've got big, their corners are really big. So I just don't see a lot of reasons for optimism here with Stafford.
Brady scored 19 fantasy points against the Seahawks. Newton scored 7. Aaron Rodgers scored 9. Tony Romo scored 12. They've held everybody in check this year.
Yeah.
So
and given Stafford's struggles so far this year, I just really have a hard time.
And I don't know how much it matters, but Calvin Johnson, Titus Young, Brandon Pettigrew, all I'm doing the air quotes thing, limited with knee injuries.
Then they'll all play.
They're all playing, but
Calvin Johnson. What do you
it certainly
do?
doesn't help to know that he's something less than 100%.
Of course.
Mikel Lacheur on your love list, Matthew, at your 18th ranked running back?
Yeah, I do think he'll be able to run here against Seattle. I thought he looked good last week. Obviously, the fumble didn't help, but I think he's looked good since he's become the starter. I think that Seattle is going to only have 4 men up front. So I think what's going to happen is that they're going to just, again, dare Detroit to run the ball, which is exactly what Chicago did to Detroit last week. So I think the same thing happens. They're just going to dare them to run the ball, and I think they'll be effective in doing so.
Marshawn Lynch's back issues creeping up again, Stefania?
Yeah, I kind of keep an eye on when he goes back on the injury report, and he had an amazing game last week against the 49ers, but clearly got hit a lot, ran a lot, and all of a sudden there he is back on the report. Now he's still practicing fully. It's not like I think this is a huge red flag, but I would say pay attention. Just keep an eye on him. Make sure he's practices fully on Friday again. And I don't think it's going to threaten his status, but it's just worth keeping an eye on.
Jacksonville Jaguars, Green Bay Packers. Stefania, let's first get your take on this Greg Jennings situation, even though it obviously doesn't impact this week.
Right. Well, he's going to have surgery with Bill Myers in Philadelphia, who does all these groin, abdomen, sports hernia type repairs. And he was evaluated by him, and he has a slight tear in the rectus abdominis. It's the six-pack muscles, as we've discussed. You guys don't have them.
Nope.
So, but for
Never
those,
even heard of them.
But for those who do,
I'm working on mine.
where you color in the abs in the front, that's where he tore. And
Well, I actually have them, but the problem is I have 3 of them.
you're
only supposed to have
you
one.
have a 3-pack.
You're only supposed to have one. No, I have 3 6-packs, and you're only supposed to have one.
Oh, right.
I see. Yes.
They're all stacked on top of each
Washboard,
other.
right. Ripped. Got it. But there seems to be, some people are confused. What was called a groin, now it's really abdomen.
Yeah.
Like, did they miss it? No. The 2 muscles from your groin, and they attach right next to each other. So essentially, you basically lose your core stability. That's what's important. You can't run. You have no power. That's what's happened with Jennings, and every time he tries to push it, he feels like he has a setback. And clearly for him, it was time to get it fixed. Apparently when he ran off the field, he felt it tighten up again in his groin. He's like,
Nothing
this is not
good
getting
comes
better.
From hustling. Mosey on.
So the bottom line is, we're hearing reports that from Adam Schefter, doctors expect him to be sidelined 3 weeks, but it's usually 3 weeks till you can resume full activity, not 3 weeks to play.
Right.
You really don't see guys come back from this. 4 is a good time frame. 6 is probably average. Consider Stevie Johnson had surgery on his groin, similar, not identical necessarily, but similar procedure in April. Still had a little bit of apprehension starting the season. I think Jennings does come back this year. He's left himself an out, saying hopefully I return this season, but I'm not sure he comes back in time for fantasy owners.
Well, their buys in week 10. Week 11, you're saying pretty much cross that off. So maybe the best case is week 12 and probably more likely 13, 14, or 15.
Yeah,
I between the lines, what you're saying.
Right. I mean, I would say if I said in my blog that I think December is the most at some point in December is the most likely return.
Now, more important for right now, Jordy Nelson all of a sudden with this hamstring issue.
Right, tightened up in practice on Wednesday and has not done anything since. They said they won't have him do anything until maybe Saturday or Sunday. That will be the first time they test it. From a rehab standpoint, you understand that. From a fantasy standpoint, that means you're going to have a big question mark. Let's say they test it in a pregame warm-up and they're like, okay, you can play. You again don't know what to expect, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being a scratch.
I'm literally going to be deciding in a deeper keeper league, Matthew, point per PR between him and Jared Cook. Like, that's going to be my Sunday decision.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. If Jordy Nelson is ruled out on Sunday morning, how high do Randall Cobb and James Jones move? Currently, Randall Cobb at 16, James Jones at 23 in your rankings.
James Jones would move to about, if Jordy Nelson were out, Randall Cobb would probably move to 10, like something like that,
Okay.
And James Jones would be 15 or something like that, 15, 14, somewhere in there.
All right.
Pretty high up.
I actually like, by the way, and just, for people in crazy deep leagues, Donald Driver
Yeah.
can still catch the ball.
Yes, he
and
can.
He will get a lot of run here. I kind of like Alex Green as a sleeper in this game. I think the rumors of his demise, I know he hasn't looked good so far. I still think there's talent there, and with the way Rodgers has emerged the last few weeks, I don't know, maybe the running lanes are a little bit better. It's a little bit of just a gut call, but
Don't have an issue with it. I agree with you. He's going to get work. Just the amount of touches he's getting, Jags 29th against the run. And if Jordy Nelson is banged up, and who wants to throw to Jermichael Finley? Maybe they lean on the run a little bit more here. I'm with you. Stefania, question for you.
By the way, just to follow up on your Jermichael Finley thing, his quote, which probably wasn't the brightest, we know he's had the shoulder issue, and he really hasn't been that visible. And he's admitting he's not 100%, and his quote was, after this game, if I don't get pounded, it should be right again. So he's clearly telling you they're running different routes so that he doesn't take contact. He's still not healthy. Don't expect much out of him this week.
So if you were thinking to yourself, maybe he gets more looks because of, possibly Nelson being out, maybe think otherwise.
Yeah, I think so. Question for you, Stefania, just from a medical standpoint, in terms of Greg Jennings, just want to go back that for a second. In retrospect, should he have not done push-ups with a girl on a speedboat on top of him?
Seems to be a popular Twitter question. That or running with a bed attached to his waist. These are pretty difficult physical feats.
Or doing the Lambo leap and talking to a guy in a plane. Spent a lot of time in the offseason shooting commercials, it seems like.
Matthew, Rashad Jennings, 15th in your rankings, felt a little bit high to me.
Did it?
Yeah. Okay. What do you like here about him?
What don't I like about him? He's a handsome man. Strong. I just
so glad you're here.
Thanks. There you go. Happy to be. Whatever. I'm not. Whatever. Sorry. Jacksonville, I believe, will try to run the ball. One of the things I like about him is the amount of touches he's getting. Mm-hmm. On the road at Green Bay, I think you can run on the Packers. I don't think the Packers are a great run defense. I think they're good. I don't think they're great. I do think you can run on the Packers, and I do think Jennings, to be honest, is all they have. So he's a 3-down back that's going to just get a ton of work here in a road game where I think they'll feature him. Who would you have? Who do I have below him that you would have ahead of him? Part of the problem is that there's a lot of question marks at running back.
I would say Stephen Ridley, Darren Sproles, Michael Turner. I don't know. Between the matchup and the work, maybe not. I'd say Ridley and Sproles for sure.
I have Ridley at 16. I have Sproles at 17. I think both guys are going to.
That's why I said it felt a little high. I didn't think it was crazy.
Yeah. I think Jennings gets a little bit more work than either of those guys necessarily do.
All right.
Yeah, and remember the Rams top 10 in the NFL against the run as well.
Pigskin Pick'em, we're all taking the Packers. Indianapolis
Lock of the week, by the way.
At Tennessee Titans. Matthew, you love Andrew Luck. You love Reggie Wayne. We know that everybody passes on the Titans. I don't know that there's a ton more to say, other than just the fact that you love Luck so much. You're starting him over a lot of guys that were preseason, starters. Rivers, Romo.
No quarterback that has faced the Titans has ever scored less than 16 fantasy points. And they give up an average of 20 a game. Andrew Luck is throwing the ball over 42 times a game.
Yeah.
You can throw 42 times against the Titans. I think you're going to put up fantasy points. I feel very confident about this call.
No, I got no issue with it.
Even though it's a good matchup.
Chris Johnson ranked 6 in your running back rankings. Is that about him being back, or is that the matchup?
Both.
So
a little bit of both.
Okay.
I'm buying Chris Johnson being back to an extent.
Okay.
But I do think it's a great matchup. I think you can run on Indianapolis. I think everyone has. So what Chris Johnson has done so far is he's run against bad run defenses.
Right.
I mean, we were all impressed with Minnesota. I think now we're like, oh, actually, maybe not as impressive. But whatever. Against bad run defenses, he has done what an elite running back should do, which is he's had very good games. And I think the Colts are a bad run defense, so I think he will once again have a good game.
You don't like any of the Tennessee receivers here just because?
I just don't know which one it's going to be. I think one guy will be here on Monday and will be like, oh, yeah, hey, a big game from Kendall Wright or Nate Washington or Kenny Britt. I just don't know which one of those guys is. I have trouble starting any one of those guys with confidence and thinking that they're going to get the majority of the work.
They'll combine for like 30 fantasy points.
Yeah.
I agree. Pigskin Pick'em, Colts at Titans. I'll take the Titans. Stefania.
Colts.
Matthew.
Colts.
Jay.
The Colts seek their first road win dating back to December 26, 2010. Since then, they have 10 straight road losses. However, they have won 6 of their past 9 at Tennessee. I'm jinxing them. They're my upset special, the Colts.
New England Patriots at St. Louis Rams in London. Stefani, do any of these Pats injuries mean anything? Like Welker, Gronk, Hernandez, all listed as
I expect them all to play.
Okay. Brandon Bolton's out again.
I expect him to be out.
Brandon Lloyd on your hate list, Matthew. None of this like, his former team in London. He really wants to show off for him. I don't know.
Sorry, governor.
No, not so much. All right. Danny Amendola.
It's a really good accent, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
I'm a man of a thousand voices. Here's the problem with Lloyd, is that he's actually not getting the deep ball. He's getting the targets.
Yeah.
But he's actually 0 for 5. This is a stat I used in Love Hate. He's 0 for 5 on pass plays of 30-plus yards with 2 drops. Last year, coming into the year, one of the stats that I was using coming into the year was like he didn't have a drop. In the last 2 years on deep balls of 30-plus yards or more, he didn't have any drops at all. For whatever reason, he just does not seem to be in sync with Tom Brady Rams. There's only 3 teams in the NFL that have allowed fewer 20-plus yard pass plays. I mean, the Rams actually are pretty good in deep coverage. So I just don't see Brandon Lloyd having a huge game here. I hope I'm wrong on this one because I love Brandon Lloyd, but I just don't have him as having a huge game here.
Patriots defense, Matthew, another one that's widely available in your top 10 this week.
They've been good. They've been good from a fantasy perspective. You look at the Rams, one of the teams that give up the most sacks in the NFL. It's a banged-up offensive line still. I like the Patriots here.
Pigs can pick 'em Patriots, quote, at Rams. We're all taking the Patriots. Miami Dolphins, right? Nobody's impressed with the Rams' home field advantage in London? Okay, we're all taking the Patriots.
No, governor. No, there isn't. I did want to mention, though, because I forgot about this, but Chris Gibbons, again, 4 straight weeks of 50 yards or more. You can beat the Patriots deep.
Yep.
You can. So I do actually like Chris Gibbons for deeper leagues in that.
Where did he show up? He was 35 in your wide receiver ranking, so certainly a respectable spot. You have him higher than Hartline, for instance, higher than Donnie Avery, higher than Kendall Wright. So in some deeper leagues, you could be playing him this week. Pigs can pick 'em Dolphins at Jets. Jay.
Dolphins are 3-1 in their last 4 road tilts versus the Jets. Reggie Bush is averaging 6.5 yards per carry for his career versus the Jets. I'm taking the Dolphins.
Matthew.
I, too, am taking the Dolphins.
Stefania?
Dolphins.
What?
Yep.
Get off my Dolphins. Stop stealing my picks.
SI came out with this poll
clearly. That's why
yesterday.
I'm
The
winning.
most overrated player in the NFL is Tim Tebow, and Tim Tebow will make everyone pay. I'm taking the Jets. Atlanta Falcons
Shocker.
at Philadelphia Eagles. Michael Turner, Matthew, no surprise on your hate list. Why in particular this week, though?
Other than his Michael Turner-ness?
Sure.
All right. He's just not getting work. Just 11 carries last week. He's had 14 carries or fewer for 3 of the last 4 weeks. You're thinking, well, all right, so he's not going to get a ton of work. Maybe he gets you a goal line carry. Well, the Eagles actually have one of the best red zone defenses in terms of this. They're 3rd in the NFL. They're tied for 3rd in terms of fewest points allowed per red zone trip. Todd Bowles, obviously the new defensive coordinator. This is a home game. I think they're fired up. I think they want to come out for the new defensive coordinator. They've had 2 weeks to prepare for this. It's a pretty good run defense there in Philadelphia. I have Turner just inside my top 20. I have him as a low-end number 2, but certainly much lower than where he is ranked in terms of fantasy points for the year.
I don't mind the call one bit. Michael Vick on your love list. Why?
Yeah, and this one could come back to bite me a little bit. I know a lot of people are saying, well, hey, the Falcons generate a lot of turnovers, and Michael Vick turns the ball over a lot. So what are you doing here? Mm-hmm. Which is fair, but Cam Newton, another mobile quarterback, had his best day of the year against the Atlanta Falcons. He had 30 fantasy points. I mean, they just gave up 325 yards to Carson Palmer. I think that, again, at home, I believe Vick will be able to put up points. I think this is going to be a bit of a shootout, obviously. They're going to have to keep up with the Atlanta Falcons, who I believe will be geared towards trying to stop LaShawn McCoy. We all know about Andy Reid's record coming out of a bye week. They'll be prepared. Michael Vick's playing for his job.
Yeah.
And so it's just how do you respond? He's going against his former team. I think he has a big game, and I do think the rushing yards that Vick will get will make up for a pick or an interception. I do think he turns the ball over once or twice, but at the end of the day, I think he's a top 10 play.
And I thought it was interesting. 3 of our 4 rankers, including you, Matthew, all ranked Macklin ahead of Jackson this week.
He appears to be back. He appears to be 100% healthy.
Yeah.
So
does have 11 catches the past 2 games. Did have the big breakout game last week. I buy it. It just it caught my attention at first. Pigs can pick 'em. Falcons at Eagles. I'm going to take the Falcons on the road. Stefania.
Falcons.
Matthew.
I believe in Andy Reid off the bye. Give me the Eagles.
Jay.
Yeah, since the NFL instituted bye weeks in 1990, the Eagles are an NFL best 19-4 in games after the bye, 13-0 under Andy Reid. I'm going to take the Eagles. I don't feel good about it, though.
I don't feel good about it either, Pod.
Redskins at Steelers. Stefania.
But as of right now, it looks like Jonathan Dwyer probably gets another start this
And
week.
I'm assuming, Matthew, he becomes a top 20 guy if the other two are definitely out.
He's borderline. He's borderline top 20. He's certainly top 25, but you look at the Redskins. The Redskins have actually done a pretty good job against opposing running backs. They have. I mean, Adrian Peterson didn't do a whole bunch against him. I mean, these are the total fantasy points that running backs for Minnesota, Adrian Peterson, 13 fantasy points total.
Yep.
The Falcons, 12 fantasy points. So it's mostly Michael Turner. Doug Martin, 11 fantasy points. I mean, so you're looking at this. Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis. I mean,
Sure.
8 fantasy points.
So let me pin you down here.
Yep.
Sunday morning,
Yep.
Mendenhall and Redmond have been ruled out. Trent Richardson is announced as active. Are you starting Trent Richardson or are you starting Jonathan Dwyer?
Dwyer.
I agree. And Richardson's currently your number 20 running back.
So there you go.
Picks and pick 'em, Redskins.
He would be number 20, but I'll wait to see because we're going to do the Friday updates. Like depending on Richardson, I might move Alex Green up a little bit ahead of Richardson as well. He'll be there in that. Dwyer will be there in that 20 to 22 range, somewhere in that range. I will say this: I would like Dwyer as a low end number 2, high end flex. I would, against the Steelers if Mendenhall's out.
Pigskin Pick'em's Redskins at Steelers. Take the Steelers. Funny.
Steelers.
Matthew.
Redskins.
Jay?
Redskins have lost 5 straight games versus the AFC. The Steelers have won 5 straight home games, are 10-1 in their last 11, dating back to last season. Give me the Steelers.
They're going to wear those ugly uniforms.
Oakland at Kansas City yet again, only 2.
Who are you taking?
I said I'm taking the Steelers.
Oh, okay.
Oakland and Kansas City, he also downloads and doesn't listen. There's one of only 2 4 o'clock games yet again this weekend. Denarius Moore was on your love list this week, Matthew, at 26 among receivers. Why?
Well, the targets. 3 touchdowns in the last 4 games. He leads the Raiders in targets despite missing the first game of the season. He can absolutely fly. And the Chiefs, among the league leaders in terms of most yards after the catch allowed.
Yep.
So I think he gets deep for one here.
Not tremendously fantasy relevant, but Peyton Hillis is set to return in this game. It's not like we expect it to affect Jamal Charles, Matthew, but just kind of interesting. He's been dropped in a ton of leagues.
Yeah, it's just, can he stay healthy? And to be honest, he hasn't looked good the few times he's been out on the field.
Yeah. No,
Sean Drone has taken some work away from him. I honestly don't know if I'm a Jamal Charles owner who I want as my handcuff between him or Drone.
Yeah.
Hillis is the name, obviously, but Drone's been the better running back this year. And I think that if something were to happen to Charles, I think both guys would. I don't think one of those guys would be the main guy. I think they'd split carries.
I agree.
And neither of them are the talent that Jamal Charles is.
I agree. Dwayne Bowe at 19 in your receiver rankings, obviously with Brady Quinn now at quarterback. This is one that I agree with, but you can't feel good about it.
No, not at all.
This is kind of like the lowest you could possibly move Dwayne Bowe.
Right. Oakland's 22nd against the pass. He's going to get a ton of targets, but
hopefully
you don't feel great about it.
Yeah.
You don't.
The problem is some of his targets will get knocked down at the line of scrimmage before they even end up anywhere near him.
Of course.
Anything else on this game that we
talked about this.
Owners?
I think we talked about this yesterday when we talked about my rankings. But yeah, I think the Chiefs. If you're looking for a defense, I like the Chiefs at home as a sneaky fantasy defense this week. I think they're a top 10 play, and they're available in a ton of leagues.
And if Darren McFadden doesn't do something here, you can just give up on him.
Yeah.
Oakland Raiders at Kansas City Chiefs. I'm going to take the Pigskin Pick 'em. I'm going to take the Raiders. It's funny.
Raiders.
Matthew. Arrowhead?
Thinking about Arrowhead. I'm thinking about invoking Arrowhead.
Jay.
Raiders have won 6 of the last 9 meetings versus Kansas City, 5 straight at vaunted Arrowhead. I like the Raiders.
Oh, sorry, inadvertent ding.
Yeah, well, vaunted
Matthew?
in Arrowhead. It's appropriate.
Come on, let's go.
Chiefs.
New York Giants at Dallas Cowboys. Ahmad Bradshaw showing up in injury reports. Stefania, should we be concerned?
No, I really am not. I keep reminding people, Ahmad Bradshaw, when he had the actual crack in his foot, was still playing and playing very, very well. And I think Ahmad Bradshaw is one of those players who's very good at understanding when he needs to manage his symptoms in order to play effectively. So I think people got a little nervous. He was supposed to practice Thursday and then he didn't. But he said, I'm practicing Friday, and he expects to play.
Matthew, you mentioned, we talked about your Eli Manning hate yesterday. Hakeem Nicks also outside the top 20 among receivers. I don't know, gut call, I think he has a big game here.
He very well might. He has the talent to. It just depends on, frankly, his health, right? Is he 100% healthy, Stefania, you feel?
Well, I don't know that I could sit here from here and say he's 100%, but I think he's worked he's working towards that. And if you look at how much he's increased his work steadily through practice every week, and then putting in the back-to-back days, now it's full practice all week. There's not really much that I'm worried about.
I might move him up a little bit. I sort of feel like I'm sort of with you that he's sort of due. You know, that he's sort of due for a big game.
It's like
kind
him
of
and
a gut
Dwayne.
call.
Him and Dwayne Bowe's a tough call right now.
Right.
It's like Bowe's been the far more productive receiver, but it's like it's Brady Quinn and Eli Manning.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. You certainly expect Dallas, New York to be high scoring. One of the reasons I'm not crazy about Manning, and I am at 11. One of the reasons I'm not crazy about Eli in this game is I do think they will be able to run very effectively.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Dallas running game, Stefania.
Yeah.
Who's healthy?
Well, remember how earlier this week I said Dallas was making noise that they were hopeful that they might have him this week, and that's
who? Let's speak.
DeMarco Murray.
Okay.
And I was thinking, well, that's crazy talk because he was on crutches and in a boot early, and there seems to be some confusion about whether he's on crutches or not on crutches. I think he hasn't been on them. Perhaps,
I got to be honest,
seems
seems fairly clear cut.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like something that should be hard to evaluate.
Yeah, maybe not a lot of detective work needed there.
I don't think he's nearly as close as has been suggested, and he's not going to play this week, and I'm not thinking he's going to play next week either. Till he's running and doing something, he's not playing. Felix Jones, bruised knee last week. Not surprised that they hold him back in practice a little bit because they need him. Whether he can carry a full load, I am not convinced. I mean, he's left with two different injuries in the game where he was supposed to start,
which is one of his things. I mean, that's been one of the Felix Jones things.
One of the things he's known for.
Please don't start Felix Jones this week unless you have literally no alternatives.
Although I do think if you're in a 16-team league and you're looking for kind of a desperation running back sort of thing, Philip Tanner here.
Yeah, if it has to be a running back, but otherwise, I'm going pretty deep into your wide receiver list and finding somebody.
That's fair.
Don't you agree?
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. I will say this. I'm surprised that Jay did not play the breaking news drop when Stefania said an athlete doesn't always do what he's told.
Des Bryant, his groin no longer an issue, Stefania, as far as we know?
As far as we know. It never was a major concern. It was something that tightened up on him that wasn't a new injury, and they just pulled him back a little bit before the game.
It'll be interesting to see, Matthew, because he was certainly trending in a very positive direction before last week. Pigskin Pick'em, Giants at Cowboys. I'm going to take the Giants.
Jay.
Cowboys beat the Giants in Week 1 this season, seeking to sweep the Giants for the first time dating back to 2007. However, Dallas is 0-3 at home versus the Giants since the Cowboys Stadium opened in 2009. Cowboys have never lost 4 straight home games versus the Giants, though, so I'm taking the Cowboys.
Stefania?
Giants.
Matthew?
Lord help me, I'm with Jay. How about them Cowboys?
New Orleans Saints at Denver Broncos on Sunday night. Stefania, this is a long time to wait to find out if Jimmy Graham's going to play.
Yeah, and last week it sure looked good. He's back in practice. He's doing a little bit, but now this week we hear from Mike Triplett from the New Orleans Times-Picayune. He's not doing anything different, really, than he was doing last week. So to me, I look at that as not really progressing in terms of how much they're pushing him, not feeling super confident that he's ready to go.
It'd be hard to wait around till Sunday night to play him, unless you were sitting there with Joel Dreesen on your roster.
Right. Which, by the way, could be an option.
No, you have Dreesen clearly ahead of Jacob Tammy in your rankings this week.
And Dreesen's out there in a lot of leagues.
Yeah. We talked about Willis McGahee being a love for you, Matthew, but Eric Decker also kind of a love. 13 in your receiver rankings.
This game is shootout city.
Yeah.
Decker's been terrific recently. Obviously, when he's not being tripped by grass, and you look at New Orleans, 30th against the pass. 29th in scoring defense. Peyton Manning at home off the bye. Decker, Demaryius Thomas. You got a Bronco start him.
Yeah. If anybody saw Darren Sproles missing practice, it was due to an illness in the family, not anything going on with him, and he's expected to play. Pigskin Pick'em, Saints at Broncos. I'll take the Broncos. Stefania.
Broncos.
Matthew.
3 in a row.
Jay.
Sweep it.
What's that?
You, Nate?
Disagree about what?
My ranking on him?
I think your ranking on him is fine. I don't believe I would play Heath Miller over him.
Would you like to put that on the board?
More fantasy points in week 8,
Yeah.
Vernon Davis or Heath Miller?
Yeah.
Sure thing.
I'll take Heath Miller.
I'll take Vernon Davis.
Put it on the board.
Put it on the board.
Here comes a 3-touchdown game for Vernon Davis.
You know that's happening. Cardinals do allow the second fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends, but I'm just trying to get more board bets going. I got to start catching up here.
Pigskin Pick'em, Niners at Cardinals. Anybody want the Cardinals? Let's make sure every Friday and catch these two. Fantasy Football Now, Sunday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern on ESPN2 for all the latest and greatest fantasy news, notes, rankings, etc.
Good luck in week number 8. Peace out!
The theme song for the Fantasy Focus was created and performed by Eric Hutchinson. Check out more of his music at erichutchinson.com. Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Focus. For more great podcasts, log on to the iTunes Music Store or Pod Center at espnradio.com.